is the United States to blame for ISIL? This intelligence report from 2012 is just one of hundreds of unclassified documents that demonstrate the US were very much aware of the establishment of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria nearly 2 years earlier. Yet they continue to arm the militants anyway. Even a US Republican presidential candidate, Rick Santorum, and a US Senator John McCain have held US foreign policy to account for the creation of ISIL. A high-ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, has expressed a similar view. Meanwhile, President Obama says ISIL's terrorist activity in France and Turkey were attacks on the civilized world. But observers noted that he did not mention the hundreds killed on a Russian plane or in Lebanon. To many, it seems he has treated these two ISIL attacks differently. On social media, Obama's selective expression of outrage has provoked widespread criticism, especially since the terrorist attacks in Lebanon took place just one day before the events in Paris. It has been pointed out that the twin blasts in Beirut killed up to 50 and wounded over 200 others. By contrast, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad expressed his condolences for victims of the Paris terror attacks, adding, "What France suffered from savage terror is what the Syrian people have been enduring for over 5 years." How does the world feel about the US's role in the growth of ISIL? Why has the US president been inconsistent in his condemnation of ISIL attacks? And why does the US oppose Russia's bombing of ISIL in Syria, but support Saudi Arabia's bombing of Yemen? These are the simple, if troubling, questions we sought to answer. Let's return to this intelligence report from 2012, showing the US knew about the establishment of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria nearly 2 years earlier, yet continued arming the militants anyway. So how many killings by ISIL is the US responsible for? That's the question we put to the American public.
Many. I think it's not only the US, the whole Western world is responsible about the chaos.
To be very honest with you, I don't know how many, who is supporting ISIS. It could be a lot of powers in the region because they have some certain agenda they want ISIS to fulfill for them.
Oh, well, none.
I'm not too sure, but we can't fully say it's all of them. You know, what I think is our government is behind something. That's what I think. I don't know.
I don't see. Well, I think ISIS is going to do what ISIS is going to do anyway, and so what the Americans do or not do is not going to influence ISIS.
It's neither here nor there. You can't pinpoint one of them exactly. It's neither. It may be. It may not be any of them.
I don't think US is responsible for any of them. None.
Zero.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would first ask how many killings is ISIS responsible for?
I have no idea. I couldn't tell you.
I have no idea.
I'm not sure the exact number, but I'm positive that it's quite a large number. I mean, it's kind of devastating because the way that I feel is, why should we even be responsible for killing anybody when we're supposed to be a responsible nation, a loving nation. So I'm not sure the exact number, but I'm sure it's a whole lot because obviously you have people who are responding from the killings, and that's pretty hurtful.
Given the early documented support for militants, even at a time the US knew of ISIL's existence, to what extent should Washington be held responsible for killings by ISIL? We put that to our experts.
I think not only they were aware of it, but they actually created it. So, I mean, it's like, I remember a very good sort of Guardian cartoon when Saddam was going to be attacked. And our foreign secretary was Jack Straw at that time, if you may recall. And the cartoon was asking Jack Straw, how do you know Saddam's got chemical weapons? And Jack Straw shows, I have the invoice. They were created, nurtured, funded, supported by US and US allies. So it's disingenuous sometimes to think that IS, US were just aware of it. They actually, it's an embodiment of what, if you like, US is trying to do in the Muslim world and other parts of the developed world, whereby rather than sending the troops themselves and euphemistically being called troops on the ground, have to, have local players who will do the bidding for the USA.
I think the US is responsible for all the killing done by ISIL. It's not part of it. The United States have done that before in Afghanistan. Now they're doing it in Iraq. And we have to understand that America do not want to stop ISIL. They just want to manage them. So there's a difference in the task they want to do in the Middle East. And if they're responsible for the funding and the arming of them, then consequently they're responsible for all that this happened in the Middle East or in Europe in the name of ISIL.
Even a US Republican presidential candidate, Rick Santorum, and a US Senator John McCain have blamed US foreign policy for the creation of ISIL. Which president has endangered the world more, Obama or Bush, and why? Here's the public's view.
Oh, definitely Bush. He stirred up all the trouble in the Middle East to start with by invading Iraq.
Bush endangered the world more because of the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of Saddam Hussein without a plan for a reasonable plan for what happens next.
Obama, he's weak. Obama's weak, and it hurt the whole United States. That's my opinion.
Well, I believe Bush endangered the world more by the invasion of Iraq.
Well, to be honest with you, I believe that President Obama has, because he needs to be a lot firmer on terrorism. He really does.
I would say Bush. Just going to war in the first place and invading the Middle East in the first place.
Honestly, I believe that there could have been a containment strategy for Iraq, honestly. And I think Saddam Hussein, although not the perfect person to lead Iraq by any sense of the imagination, could have been contained and worked with. ISIS was allowed to form by Obama not taking action after the Iraq War in Syria and Iraq.
Bush, and because he, I don't think, interpreted the situation in Iraq very well.
We asked our experts whether President Obama or President Bush bear the greater responsibility for making the world a more dangerous place, given the US's own role in the growth of ISIL.
I think Obama is the lesser of two evils, but the war has started by George Bush. What Obama was left with is to clean up. And I do believe in the US politics, the Democrats and the Republicans are parallel. They don't do things opposite each other. They just pick up from where the other ended, and they do it in a... Democrats will try to do it in the name of democracy and instilling democracies. The Republicans have started this war in the name of avenging those who died in 9/11. But at the end of the day, Bush started the war. Obama in his 8 years has started or engaged in 8 wars. And he gets a Nobel Prize for Peace. So that tells you about the world we're living in and the American foreign policy.
Even senior Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, says the US is to blame for ISIL. We asked the public to consider how the rest of the world feels about the US and ISIL.
I don't see it as cause and effect. ISIS was going to happen anyway. There are people who believe in violence as an answer. And who is president and who wasn't is secondary.
I believe that. The U.S. is a little blame from ISIS. The U.S. didn't do nothing to stop them. So ISIS is where they're at today because of that.
Probably terrible. Definitely terrible. I would probably think that they would question why such a strong and violent and hostile relationship between the two. I mean, I will imagine the world is probably as devastated as we are in our own country.
That is being a little bit simplified, and too often you get into simplifications in politics when you're making sound bites. The entire world, including ISIS, is to blame for ISIS.
No, I can't.
I imagine the rest of the world, well, that's a bit sweeping statement. I imagine many people in Syria and would blame US for ISIS, and possibly people in Europe as well.
What is the international community saying about the relationship between the United States and ISIL at a time senior American politicians are pointing the finger at America's own involvement in ISIL's evolution? Here's the expert view.
Well, it's becoming abundantly clear over the last few years, and certainly since the bombing in Paris, it has really focused the minds of the Western powers. The Washington consensus is now moving in the direction that ISIS needs to be eliminated as rapidly as possible. But the reality is that what America and the West, on the one hand, they want to get rid of ISIS, and on the agenda, they still have a motive to get rid of Assad. So they're really trying to, I don't know which metaphor to use, either riding two horses or climbing two trees at the same time. You can't really achieve both the objectives. That's why I think what Hezbollah, what Iran, and what Russia are doing actually at this moment is more honest, more clear, and the effectiveness of what Russian input has been in the last 2 months is very clear, that ISIL or Daesh is on the run in Syria at this moment. And if it wasn't for Iran, ISIL would be at the gates of Baghdad, what they did in Mosul and other places.
I do believe in this space of information and the way that we can see how everything is unfolding. It's naive and ignorant to think that the rest of the world doesn't know that America has a hand in this. What's surprising and quite shocking is the fact that the people on the other end of this, who are suffering from this and who know that America has started this, especially in the countries where they're considered as allies to America and still pay the price of this terrorism, like Iraq and Saudi Arabia, all these, Qatar and these countries are not safe from what's happening, yet they still follow the same agenda without anyone trying to stop the whole thing at source. We're trying to firefight, but no one is trying to solve the basis of the issue. And we'll continue to firefight if everyone is in harmony with this foreign policy of Washington without even discussion. So those allies in the region, I believe we should start there, where those allies at least getting an understanding of where is America heading with this, because they're 10,000 miles away from what's happening, but the allies are fearing and seeing this every day.
President Obama says the ISIL killings in France and Turkey were attacks on the civilized world, but he did not mention the hundreds killed on a Russian plane or in Lebanon. Why has he condemned these two ISIL attacks so differently? The public said this.
Maybe because they happened at a different time and there were different things going on. ISIS wasn't exactly a huge threat then. They were becoming a threat. And I'm not exactly sure why he didn't comment on that. I think he should have.
No idea. It's too far for me.
I really don't know. He should have probably, but he didn't.
I don't know. I know he has certainly condemned them. I don't know the fine points of the same way.
It goes back for him being weak and afraid. He just don't want to say it. He's just afraid to admit it.
I'm not sure.
Wow, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I really don't.
I don't know, but I would say that there are a lot of questionable things that Barack Obama does and doesn't do.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, but I would think that he should condemn them, right? Any reasonable person should, I think.
I'd like to hear what President Obama says about this. You know, if we can address him with this particular question, it'd be nice to see what his response is.
I don't believe we're on good terms with Russia. and France is an ally of ours, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be probably the reason.
Can our experts clarify why President Obama has not condemned attacks against a Russian aircraft or in Lebanon in the same way he condemned attacks in France and Turkey?
But what's sad to note is that it really sounds like old imperial and colonial powers, that white lives mattered more, so to speak. And in America it happens, as you know, black people are killed on a daily basis by the police and nothing is taken into account. Or when there used to be KKK lynching mobs in USA killing black people. So it just sort of, sad to note that if a bomb is planted or terrorist attack takes place in Paris, and when you drive in London going towards Heathrow Airport, you see a big poster saying that hashtag pray for Paris. And just almost 11 months ago, there was a similar killing of 160 odd school students in Peshawar, and no one talked about, pray for Peshawar at all. So it's a contradiction, it's a dichotomy in thinking, and it really shows very clearly to the world that the Western powers are only interested in their own people. And you quite rightly said, what happened with the plane, the Russian plane, no one talks about it. There wasn't a sort of media bliss, so to speak. Or just 2 days prior to the Paris attack, 40 people were killed in Beirut by the same Daesh sort of bombing, and not even bit of column space in the newspapers or media reflected what happened in Beirut.
Because Obama doesn't consider those victims as victims of the civilized world. The way that America and the West is dealing with this whole thing in the Middle East is that as long as the victims are in the Middle East, that's fine. When it comes to our borders, then this is an attack on civilization. And trying to ignore the fact that people in that region are suffering much bigger and larger scale of attacks and victims than we saw in France. Yet it doesn't get any media coverage, because if it does get the same coverage in the same level as France, then the world would actually start talking about this. But America would prefer to keep the war there, continue to manage the war there without stopping the war. And if it comes to our borders, then it is an attack on civilization. But this attack on civilization can be seen in the airstrikes of America. It is an attack on civilizations. Those are thousands of year civilizations in Iraq and in Syria that America is destroying without anyone holding them accountable to that. And as we've seen in the last 5 years, ISIL, a US-made thing, have technically wiped out a lot of civilized cities and places in Syria, but that doesn't actually affect or make the Americans feel bad about it. As long as it's not in our borders, it's fine.
Why does the US oppose Russia's bombing of ISIL in Syria, but fully supports Saudi Arabia's bombing of Yemen? Let's hear the public's view.
I don't know. I think they're acting out of anger. I think they're trying to come up with a fast and quick solution, and they're not thinking about their past problems that they've had to deal with. This is sort of the same thing, so why they would do one and not the other, I'm not exactly sure.
Because war is a business. War brings money, and also, we are in countries that basically they are rich because also they make wars.
I don't fully understand America's relationship with Israel, because it's a very biased relationship.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but I think a lot of the American support for Saudi Arabia is they're an ally, but I don't know that they should be so supportive of Saudi Arabia.
I would probably say so that the U.S. won't feel solely responsible for a lot of those bombings, just so that they won't take all of the responsibility for what they've done and how they've treated some of the members of our global family. So definitely I'd probably say, yeah.
Probably because our government's perspective on supporting the Middle Eastern world as far as trying to be friendly with, Saudi Arabia. That's what I would think.
No comment.
We invited our experts to consider why the US is opposed to Russia's military involvement against ISIL in Syria while backing Saudi Arabia's military activity in Yemen.
Well, this actually really encapsulates the whole thinking of US. It's not just in Yemen that they're supporting the Saudis, but what has gone on in Bahrain for the last 4 years, when you had a democratic grassroots movement taking place in Bahrain, and the Saudis send in their troops, and that challenge to the monarchy was dispensed with completely. There's total contradiction in the whole approach that USA takes. And it's not only in the Middle East, but as we know historically, all kinds of tin pot dictators were supported in South America over the last 30, 40 years. America got rid of Allende in the 70s, who was a democratically elected leader, and put in Pinochet, who for the next 25 years killed 250,000 of his own civilians. So when it doesn't serve the American purpose, they will support dictators. And actually, in reality, I think they are frightened of democracy. When there is real democracy, it will challenge America and will challenge America emphatically.
America is not interested in stopping the war as much as they're interested in managing it, while the Russians clearly want to stop the war. So there's no coordination between both of them currently. And America doesn't like the fact that Russia is basically destroying their investment in the region. So they are calling for coordination. America, if they wanted to get rid of ISIL, they would have years ago. And now with the Russian intervention, the whole equation has changed. So they're trying to push the Russians into more coordination and trying to cut the deals, basically. So hence, they're not really happy about those independently decided airstrikes by the Russians. As for Yemen, I think in the bigger scheme of things, what's happening in Saudi Arabia and Yemen is very close to what happened in the 60s and 70s in the United States and South America. It's an autocratic regime in Saudi Arabia. They don't want to have a democratic state in their southern borders. They don't want those who control this democratic state to be revolving someone else's spectrum, as they call them, allies of Russia and Iran. And Saudi Arabia would not survive with a democratic state close to it. This is not the first war they have in Yemen. We have to think about the war they started 40 years ago and 45 years ago in Yemen to oppose the communist or socialist government that was taking over in Yemen. So the Saudis never wanted to help the Yemenis and never wanted them to have a state.
The US has been very unsettled by the terror attacks in Paris. President Obama has described these and the attacks in Turkey as attacks on the civilized world. But he did not mention the ISIL attacks in Lebanon and against a Russian plane, which killed almost 100 more people than all the attacks in Paris. It seems that America's interest in terror is defined not by the terrorist group or death toll, but by the target. And when it comes to accepting responsibility for helping ISIL grow, there are two types of politician in Washington: those who admit it and those who say nothing.